Vanakkam. This is Uma Makeshwari, Associate Professor from the Department of Language, Culture and Society, SRMIST Katakuttu. This session will help you to understand the components of abstract writing. An abstract is a brief summary of about 150 to 250 words, and it highlights the key points of a research paper. So, why do we need abstract? We need abstract so that the reader can understand what the research is all about, what the article is all about. Without spending time to read the entire article, the reader can understand the gist of it by reading the abstract. So now we understand the purpose of abstract is to help readers determine the paper's relevance. So, with this purpose, we could very well understand the importance of abstract because since it helps to understand what the research is all about without reading the entire article, it plays a crucial role in a research paper publication. It is kind of creates a first impression with the editor or reviewers who are reviewing the article. Also, when a proposal is submitted for approval, an abstract will be attached so that the people who approve the proposal can go through the abstract, know everything about the proposal before even opening the proposal and reading it. So, with that, we understand abstract, which is a summary of the experiment or the research in 150 or 200 words plays a crucial role in creating a good impression among the people who review that research paper. So now we could see abstract being written for research papers, for research articles, for journal publication, and for grant applications. With this brief introduction about what is an abstract, what is the purpose of abstract, and its importance, we move on to the key components of abstract. So the abstract should begin with a background. If any abstract is being written without the background or setting the context, the reader might not understand the relevance or why that experiment is being conducted. So, to give a clear understanding about the research being done, it is very important to open up the abstract by telling the background. The first one or two sentences should talk about the background and set the context. After setting the context and talking about the background, the researcher should move on to talk about the research problem. The problem that the researcher has identified to explore and solve or to make it understand what kind of thing that research is all about. So once we talk about research problem, there we go on to talk about the objectives, the aim of the research. So it is all combined. Identifying of the problem gives the researcher the aim to explore. The research objective is set after identifying the problem. So the abstract also, starting from background, should move on to talk about the research problem and objectives. The next to second and third lines should be about research problem and objectives. And then comes the method that the researcher has adapted to achieve the objectives that person has set. So the methods become the third component of the abstract. That how the researcher has explored this problem and how the researcher has achieved the objectives he or she has set earlier. But the experiment conducted with the methods explained, there you get the results. So that mention should be the fourth component of the abstract, the results of the experiment. The findings that the researcher has found by conducting the experiment or the research becomes the next important component of the abstract. And then the final component, conclusion, comes. Based on the findings, the researcher must be making out the the findings implications in the area of research the person has made becomes the final component of abstract. Now we move on to the strategies or the process involved in writing abstracts. With an understanding of the main components of abstract, now we will see how to organize that abstract, how to organize the content into the format of an abstract. To begin with, completing the entire research paper is the key to write an effective and abstract. To begin with, we should start by writing the paper first and then try to write the abstract. Why? Because writing the entire complete full paper will give a good control over the content and the experiment conducted by the researcher. So the researcher knows the objectives, researcher knows the method, researcher knows the results, and then discussion, everything, findings and implications. With this strong knowledge, the researcher should move on to write the abstract. So, while writing the abstract, how to identify the key points from a very big research being conducted from a research article that runs over 20 or 30 pages. This is how it has to be done. The researcher should identify the sections, can divide the entire article into 3 or 4 or 5, 6 sections, and then identify the keywords on each section and summarize the key point and write summarizing sentences to each section. For example, the researcher has given an introduction as a background to the research article that can be taken as section 1. And then the researcher would have done a lot of literature review so that that person identifies the research gap and formulates a research problem becomes the second. Formation of research problem becomes the second section. And then going on for the method that best suits to achieve the objective, setting the research objectives, third section. And then going for the method is the fourth section. So likewise, the entire research paper can be divided into sections. After dividing into sections, look for the keywords that are to be said to the reader. Those keywords will help the reader to understand what the research is all about. So, underlining the keywords in each section must be the next activity. After identifying the keywords, the entire section has to be summarized. Summarizing is condensing the big content into a smaller one without missing the important key points. That is called summarizing. So the entire section with the important keywords has to be condensed into 1 or 2 sentences. So we get a key sentence with all the keywords to each of the section identified from the research article. Now, these 6 or 7 key sentences will become a framework for the researcher to write the abstract. With these key sentences, the researcher should move on to the next step of following a model of writing introduction, method, results, and discussion model. So all those key sentences need to be organized in this model. And then after writing this, a revision has to be made. The author should meticulously go through the abstract written to check for any loosely connected sentence, or any redundancy, any word repeatedly said again and again, any verbosity is there, whether the content is clear and concise, whether the content has a clarity has to be checked. A revision has to be made in this stage. And then after the revision, identifying the keyword becomes the last step. So as said earlier, each section will have keyword, and each keyword that helps the person to understand this abstract or a research are to be given as keywords below the abstract. For example, when a researcher is talking about the psychological behavior of students in a group project, then the researcher can have a keyword like disposition. Disposition is a word that talks about the psychological behavior of a person. So we should identify the key areas, and each key area should be condensed to one keyword, and that keyword should come below the abstract, so that the reader can understand these are the words that are elaborated in the abstract and in the research paper. So now this process is explained in the form of a flowchart where we begin with the complete research paper, move on to identifying key information, and organize in the model or in the structure of introduction, method, research, and discussion, and then revising it and looking for coherence, achieving coherence. Coherence is the logic connection among the sentences. And then we get an abstract of 150 or 200 words as per the requirement. And a general tip regarding the grammar. When we talk about the component, we could also talk about the mechanics involved in it, the grammar involved in it. So one common rule to follow while writing abstract is this. When an established fact is conveyed, we can always go for present tense. For example, in English language teaching research, reading helps to improve writing skills. Reading skill helps to improve the writing skill. Is written in a present tense because it is an established fact. Reading skill and writing skill are interrelated. The more you read, the better will be your writing. So all these established facts must be recorded or written in the form of using present tense. But when I conduct an experiment with regard to reading or writing, that specific results need to be mentioned in past tense because I conducted it in a period of time earlier to the time of writing. So I go for past tense. To established facts, present tense. For specific activity that I do as a part of research, I should go for past tense. And the researcher is very much absorbed in his or her own research and might assume that everyone must be knowing about the technical words that are related to the field of research. But that is not the case. The reader might not be aware of the technical words that the researcher is accustomed to do or used to deal with. So we should avoid the technical terms, two technical terms or technical jargons, and also undefined abbreviations. There are abbreviations that are generally or commonly followed, but there are abbreviations that are not known by many, which are exclusively used by the writer. We should be very careful in avoiding those undefined abbreviations, which might hamper the understanding of the content of the abstract, which might not help help the reader to understand the abstract. So after completing everything, this abstract can be shared with people who is new to this area of research to check whether that reader can understand the content conveyed in the abstract. To check the clarity of the information shared, this could help us to know that. Now we move on to some sample sentences to understand each component. Since I am from Language, Culture and Society Department, a language teacher, I have taken example from my area of research, like in language teaching. And this is common to any kind of research or any field of research. When I say background, for example, if a researcher is going to conduct an experiment to know how this animations, the impact of animations on young children, then that researcher should have a background set in the abstract. So that researcher can begin that abstract by saying animation has increasingly become a dominant format in children's entertainment, raising questions about its impact on them. Since out of many formats of entertainment, the screen watching has become predominant there in the lives of children. So children watch the screen as a form, as a way of entertainment, and definitely it will have an impact on the children, either psychologically or in language also. As a language teacher, I could say this animation watching might impact if the language of watching. If the animation is made in English language and the child is repeatedly watching it, it might help the child to grasp certain words. This I can give example from my personal life where my elder son, who watched the Pokemon from the age of 2 or 3, grasped the words like evolution, awesome, the repeated words that come in Pokemon animated series. These words like evolution and awesome is very much pretty higher to that level of vocabulary of a 5 or 4 year old child in Indian context. But my son got it because of watching this animated serial. So this is the background I'm setting in. And then I move on to problem or objective when how to say that a sample sentence. This study investigates the influence of animated shows on vocabulary acquisition among primary students. So this is a different context, not the one with children. So now I'm telling the objective. This sentence tells the objective of the researcher, and that comes next to the background. And then a mention about the method comes the third. So a mixed methods approach was employed combining classroom observations with pre and post tests. A mixed method means both quantitative and qualitative research methods mixed together becomes a mixed method approach. So qualitative data we collect from the classroom observations, and the post and pre-test marks become a quantitative data. So I'm talking about method. That's a third component of abstract. And then comes the mentioning about results and findings. The findings indicate significant improvement in vocabulary retention after exposure to educational animation. This is the finding the researcher has found, which comes after the method and then ends with the last component of talking about the implication. The research suggests incorporating animation in curricula can enhance language outcomes for young learners. So this is with the example I have explained the 5 major components of abstract writing. Now let me show you the basics, how to understand this with reference to your research. So you could open up any research, a published article, and an abstract can be taken for learning this way of writing abstract. You can learn the art and the science of writing abstract by exploring how published papers abstracts are written. That could help you a lot. Reading other articles would help expand our knowledge about the subject. That is what we call as literature review. When you review the previously published articles and books, you gain a lot of knowledge and insights about the research that the researcher is making. But it also helps. Another advantage of reading a lot of articles is this: to understand how they construct the sentences, how each paragraph is placed. A researcher can read an article or an abstract multiple times for multiple reasons. A researcher can take 6 or 7 articles or abstracts from the journal which the researcher aims to publish, get some 8 or 10 abstracts, and then look how each abstract introduces the research. The introduction part alone can be focused. And again, the abstract can be dealing with how this result is being projected, how the implication is mentioned, what kind of grammar being used. So reading again and again with different objectives would give a clarity over how to write an abstract. So this is an abstract given, and this is how this has to be approached. You just give different colors. You take an abstract, give different colors, and identify each color. For example, the first pink is all background. In that given abstract, this is how the background is mentioned. And then the objective is mentioned, and then the method, and then the results, and then comes the conclusion. If you give colors to each component, it becomes automatic to you. Your brain registers this division, and once you start writing your abstract, it becomes automatic, and you would be covering all the basic components of abstract. So now we understood what are the components and with examples, and how to recognize how other authors have written there in their abstracts, so that you get a better understanding of how to achieve in your abstract writing. Now, how to go for style. How to achieve style in writing an abstract is what I'm going to share now. So, once the research article is being written and you have started writing abstract, a standard way of writing, conveying a point is the research attempts to. that is a much used kind of cliche that mostly 99% of researchers use this term, the research attempts to. So now we can go for a different verb based on the nature of the article. So we could identify verbs, that is, attempts is a verb which expresses action. And we could identify an adjective. Adjective is a word that explains about the noun. For example, if your research is noun, this exploratory research, empirical research, these empirical, exploratory, analytical, everything is called adjective, which talks about the noun. So identifying appropriate verb and identifying appropriate adjective as per the research you have conducted will add quality to your abstract. It helps to achieve the style that you want to achieve in writing the abstract. For example, look at the variations that are possible. Depending on the context, you can pick that verb. So this study aims to, this research seeks to, the objective of this study is to, this paper endeavors to, this investigation examines. If your research examines, you go for this verb. As per the context, the verbs can be selected. The present study explores. If you are exploring a field of research, go for the word this study explores instead of saying this research attempts to. So these are the variations that are possible. And now we come to the adjectives part. For based on again the nature of the research, we can describe the research by choosing the appropriate adjective. Right? It's a systematic research, meticulous, detailed, all these words. I have divided that to the context. As per the context, it is divided. If you want to describe a research study based on the quality and rigor of the research, these are the options there available as adjectives that can be used. If you want to talk about by scope or coverage of the research, this one is a broad study, an extensive study, all these with respect to scope or coverage. And if it is with related to methodology or approach, then these are the adjectives that can be used: qualitative, quantitative, empirical, analytical. Based on the context, you should select the appropriate adjective. And to refer to credibility and validity, these are the options there available. And if the context is about originality and novelty, this is an innovative approach developed by the researcher. Yes. So now, to achieve a good style in writing abstract, the first thing the researcher has to do is to divide the research, identify into which context this research falls in. Which context am I going to refer? Based on that context, you pick the appropriate adjective that adds style to your research. These are the basic things about abstract writing.